As a concept and as a political entity, the nation of Finland came of age in the mid to late 19th century. Emerging alongside it was the country's feminist movement. Despite this concurrence in many nations, much remains to be explored regarding the complex relationship between constructs of gender and nation, feminism and nationalism. Because the story of nation building also seems inseparable from the chronicle of 19th century Finnish art and culture, a field in which both men and women participated, artistic production is an appropriate lens through which to begin unraveling this relationship. The names that arise repeatedly in chronicles of cultural Finnish nation building are those of men. Albert Edelfelt, the first Finnish artist embraced by the Parisian art world, Akseli Gallen-Kallela, who joined indigenous themes with international style, Eero Järnefelt, whose portraits comprise a veritable gallery of Finnish nationalists, the composer Jean Sibelius, who set Finland's story to music, J.L. Runeberry, the poet who visualized Finland's rural populace. I could continue, but you get the idea. That discussions of Finland's most dominant 19th century cultural trend predominantly exclude women is perhaps surprising when we consider the sheer number of women active in Finnish art during the mid to late 19th century, the key years of Finnish nation building. As art education was formalized in Finland, women studied art alongside men in the same classes, as a hobby or sometimes as part of a preparation for a career in teaching. Finnish women were at a certain advantage compared to their counterparts elsewhere. Drawing schools, as they were established beginning in the 1840s, accepted female students and offered instruction to boys and girls together, and statistically, female artists proliferated. In the Finnish Art Society's 1847 inaugural exhibition, 1/3 of the artists represented were women. By 1861, more than half were women. Moreover, of funds granted to artists for education abroad, in the first 5 years, that is from 1878 to 1882, 11 out of 12 awards were given to female artists. The situation changed slowly, but still by 1890, more than half of the winners of these awards were women. So if women artists from Finland had so many opportunities, relatively speaking, why is their work not more prominent among the nationalist output created by their male peers in the dominant cultural trend of the time? This paper represents work in progress, exploring this question, I hope ultimately to complicate the notion that Finnish women artists of the 19th and early 20th centuries worked wholly outside the tradition of nation building. And further, I plan to explore the ways in which the careers of those women artists who did remain largely outside the nationalist scope were impacted by the movement. Critical to this discussion is the axiom that the process through which the nation comes into being is one of dissemination as well as active building. Historian Miroslav Hrok's analysis of the progression of national consciousness from a vague sense of belonging to a group to a widespread overt state of patriotism is an especially useful framework for Finland, as his study pertains specifically to small states whose nation-building processes begin while a non-dominant group is enfranchised, as of course was the case during Finland's nationalist period. Hrok divides the emergence and dissemination of national consciousness into 3 phases, characterized and defined by the measurable growth of national activity. The beginning of the nationalization process, phase A, was marked by the growing interest of a small group of individuals, often Enlightenment scholars, for the language, culture, and history of the proto-national group. In Finland, this is largely marked by the collecting of folk literature early in the 19th century. In phase B, which for Finland emerges beginning around 1840, nationalists organized efforts to imbue the population with patriotic political sentiment. This group includes artists who take up the themes of landscape and folk literature in their paintings. By the end of phase C, the patriotic group had an organizational structure that reached the masses throughout the realm of the nation, and we can consider this accomplished by 1917, the year of independence. I believe that Finnish visual art reflects this trajectory clearly. moving from national themes expressed for intelligentsia viewers, those who are museum goers and newspaper readers, such as the painting on the left, one of the first most famous landscape paintings from Finland, and moving from that to the production of politically charged work to serve a broad audience, as in illustrated books, such as the one you see on the right, illustrating Finland's national anthem. So the nationalist paintings created in the middle of the 19th century are joined by prints, book illustrations, and other broadly circulated artistic form as the nationalist movement reaches a wider and wider audience, moving toward the end of the 19th century. The work of certain Finnish women artists suggests that they, like their male peers, were engaged in a process of disseminating Finnishness, both within the nation and without, that is, promoting Finland to an international audience, although they did not typically adopt the themes advocated by nationalists: history, the landscape, folk literature, and rural life. In particular, I argue, the careers and writings of two artists, Venny Solden-Brofelt and Fanny Sjöberg, make clear that the domain did not belong to men alone. Finnish ideas of gender in the 19th century, like the ideals of nationhood, had roots in essentialist thinking, in which women are prescribed certain roles. Obviously, many women, particularly women artists, rejected the specific roles assigned to them by their compatriots, but in doing so, that they didn't necessarily follow the path popularized by their male counterparts. So to find their nationalist activity, we have to look to the fringes of the canon of Finnish cultural nationalism. So I contend that Finnish women participated in nation building in different ways than men did, and that their contributions occurred primarily late in the dissemination period in works intended to engage broad audiences. So we'll start with one of the icons of Finnish cultural nationalism, the Finnish Pavilion of the World's Fair of 1900, well within the period of broad dissemination of nationalist sentiment. In previous World's Fairs, Finland's presentations were joined with Russia's, and that Russia granted Finland to construct its own pavilion, which was the smallest at the fair, was remarkable. And Finnish artists seized this opportunity to represent the best of their nation as they saw it. The appealing exoticism of this presentation and the care that the artists took in crafting it won international acclaim, to the great relief and pride of Finnish nationalists. So the architecture of the building itself became famous, and it's also best remembered for the series of frescoes that Akseli Gallen-Kallela painted on the building ceiling. And here you see below these frescoes recreated on the ceiling of the National Museum in Helsinki. So here's the canonical view of the Finnish pavilion at the 1900s World's Fairs. But there was more going on, and particularly there were 14 paintings, many no longer extant, that were commissioned to hang above the windows inside the pavilion. These depicted the Finnish landscape, everyday life, and economic activity. And one of those paintings was by the artist Venny Solden-Brofelt, who was awarded a bronze medal at the fair. Venny Solden-Brofelt had been raised in a nationalist family, and she married Juhani Aho, one of Finland's most prominent nationalist authors. She studied in Helsinki, St. Petersburg, and Paris, and her style also reflects visits to Italy, where she copied early frescoes. In 1892, she, along with her husband, and Eero Janefelt, was among the first artists to explore the region of Karelia, a trip that resulted in a series of paintings by her of the peasantry, a very popular subject among male nationalist artists, but rarely seen in the work of women artists of the period. Unlike work by her peers Helena Scherfbeck and Maria Wieck, these demonstrate less the influence of French naturalism than of early Renaissance frescoes, communicating purity and idealism rather than direct observation, something that we see throughout the career of Venny Solden-Brofelt. The praise that critics offered her work, using phrases like calm and assured, established a sense of the reception of Venny Solden-Brofelt as being quite different from that of the Finnish women pioneers of realism, Scherfbeck, Wieck, Westermarck, whom critics had so rejected in preceding decades. So she starts with a rather nationalist orientation toward peasantry subjects, something very much like what her male peers were painting. But as the century marches forward, Soldan-Brofeld comes to prefer draftsmanship to painting, a predilection that certainly contributes to her exclusion from many studies of Finnish nationalism, despite her position at the very center of Finnish cultural nation building. Perhaps her clearest efforts at nationalist activity moving into the 20th century are illustrated books for children. You see on the left there the Finnish picture book, which she published with her husband. She also illustrated the famous nationalist work, A Children's Reader, by Zacharias Topelius. So Soldan-Brofeld seems to me to be a rather singular example of a Finnish woman artist trained in official schools of art who joins a nationalist circle. Her preference of drawing to painting might be implicated here. As Rita Kontinen has demonstrated, women painters seem to consider themselves more part of an international artistic milieu, identifying with the culture that we've just heard about from Charlotte Lindvald, and that identification seems to have largely superseded a commitment to nation building. Soldan-Brofeld, though, also didn't belong entirely to this milieu. She wasn't of the upper class, and so she may have also turned to drawing and illustration, looking for a form with a ready market in mind. Children were a frequent subject for the artist, whose writing makes clear that she considered children a particularly appropriate subject for women artists, adopting some of the essentialist notions of the time, and even contemporaneous feminist thought by such authors as the Swedish writer Ellen Key, who she admired very much. Given the artist's prominent position in the young Finland circle of nationalists and the broad dissemination of her illustrations, it's also tempting to consider that this theme might have a gently nationalist undercurrent, advocating the nurturing of a young generation of Finns and securing a fruitful future for the proto-nation. Soldan-Brofeld and her family rented a home near Lake Tuusula, just north of Helsinki, and they were soon joined by other members of the Young Finland Circle, as did many of her peers, including Mari Galen, the wife of Akseli Gallen-Kallela. Veni concentrated on the decoration of her family's home and creating a distinctly Finnish environment. Taking inspiration from the English arts and crafts movement, as well as such Scandinavian contemporaries as Karen Larsson, Veni even designed and created furniture. A 1917 newspaper article written by Soldan-Brofeld links the artist's interest in Finnish decor with her understanding of women's particular talents, suggesting the realm as another that was especially appropriate for women. At the time of this writing, organized handicraft had for many years been a focus for women artists and for nationalists. That activity dates at least to the 1879 founding of the Friends of Finnish Handicraft. Fanny Sjöberg, one of Finland's most innovative early painters, among whose work early strains of expressionism can be identified, largely abandoned her painting career after 1880 to administer the fledgling Friends of Finnish Handicraft, which had the initial aim of collecting folk textiles and creating works that were contemporary in purpose and construction. Many of these pieces were designed by the nation's leading artists based on historical patterns, linking past, present, and future Finlands and suggesting a culture that was ancient and enduring. Sjöberg's interest in professional opportunities for women artists dates to early in her career, as does her interest in nation building. Although those interested in early modernism might bemoan her decision to abandon painting, it is possible that in the realm of handicraft, Sjöberg found an ideal opportunity to marry her interest in opportunities for women artists and Finnish nationalism. In 1879, in advocating the founding of the Friends of Finnish Handicraft, Sjöberg wrote, "While the man sang the immortal verses of the Kalevala, the woman wove the colors of the rainbow into her cloth and created models with her own rich imagination. Unknowingly, she created a patriotic treasure." Sjöberg and other nationalists, predominantly women who organized the Friends of Finnish Handicraft, advocated the participation of contemporary Finnish women in both the construction and wide dissemination of Finnish national identity. The gathering of folk textiles, often the ruja rug, for which Finland is renowned, mirrors earlier and ongoing efforts to collect and disseminate folk poetry, and the adaptation of historic designs to contemporary work ensured the broad availability of these highly portable, affordable markers of identity. Moreover, the group doubtless strengthened the nation in other more discreet ways, offering public education, promoting Finnish design, and providing economic opportunities to Finnish women who only in the preceding decade, in 1864, had legally been granted the right to earn their own living and whom were called to action by the Friends of Finnish Handicraft. So we can return to this icon of Finnish nationalism, the pavilion at the 1900s World Fair. And there, the Friends of Finnish Handicraft was awarded a gold medal for textiles made for the Iris Room, which you see on the right. The Iris Room was designed by Gallen Kallela and decorated with textiles and furniture designed by the artist and ceramics from the Iris Company. Gallen Kallela merged the stylization of then-current international artistic trends and Finnish themes of nature with the national practice of rug weaving to produce works that were both national and current. He is far less remembered for his work in the decorative arts than for his monumental frescoes and oils. Reinstating the value of decorative arts and crafts to the process of Finnish nation building is, I think, an important step toward understanding the role that women played in this movement. The examples of Soran Brofelt and Sjöberg, two women artists clearly and publicly engaged with nationalism and with the opportunities available to women artists, suggests a starting place for deeper exploration of the roles that Finnish women artists played in nationalism. Their contributions were perhaps not the canonical paintings of their male contemporaries, but were, I argue, particularly apt contributions to the broad dissemination of nationalist sentiment. If we can then establish with certainty that women artists impacted the nation-building movement, the question remains, what was the nature of the impact of Finnish national romanticism on those women artists who did not adopt the dissemination of patriotic sentiment via the traditions of handicraft or illustration? I turn now to an early painting by Helena Scherfbeck. It dates from the year she graduated from the Finnish Art Society's drawing school, the same year she publicly exhibited her work, and the following year she will continue her artistic education in Paris. Her work is an interpretation of poetry by J.L. Runeberg, Finland's first national poet, whose Tales of Ensign Stroll, written between 1848 and 1860, is one of the most celebrated Finnish literary works of the 19th century. Inspired by Runeberg, artists engaged in the nation-building movement created genre scenes celebrating the industriousness and fortitude of the Finnish peasantry, but artistic depictions of this work were rare before Albert Edelfelt's early 20th century illustrations. This work hails the 1808-1809 war that resulted in the transfer of Finland from Sweden to Russia, and this period was considered the genesis of an independent Finnish identity. So here, Scherfbeck is anticipating the Finnish nation-building movement. She's adopting a new theme that hadn't previously been represented in painting, in taking up this particular work by Runeberg, and it's a theme that wouldn't be revisited for at least a decade. Nevertheless, nation-building was not a path that Scherfbeck followed. This is a place where this is the beginning and the end, I think, of her overtly nationalist work. Unlike her male colleagues, she wasn't encouraged to paint the historical, literary, or folkloric subjects that would contribute to the project. The way in which she would have responded to such a charge is a topic of unnecessary conjecture, but the path that she did choose is surprising. Scherfbeck and her peers painted in Brittany even before the arrival of Paul Gauguin and Emile Bernard, adopting a lighter palette, less restrained brushwork, and subjects drawn from everyday life. These works were not critically acclaimed, and realism remained largely outside the Finnish artistic tradition until Gallen Kallela first adopted the approach in 1884. Scherfbeck then teaches in Helsinki and retreats to the privacy of her studio. Over the course of a long career, she keeps abreast of artistic trends, and like many of her female contemporaries, is really a pioneer of modernism in Finnish art. To return to Fanny Schuberg, some of her peers playing similar roles. Before she turns to handicraft, these are the kinds of landscapes she's producing. Magnificent technique, bright colors, and hints of the expressionism that Ellen Tesleff will adopt later in the century. Ellen Tesleff is the first Finnish artist to be influenced by Kandinsky. Neither Schuberg nor Tesleff was embraced by Finland's art critics, who remained committed to nationalism and were a little leery of this early modernism. And Tesleff especially is criticized as working in a manner that's considered too masculine. I don't get it either. Although the spirit of nation building infected every aspect of late 19th century Finnish culture, it seems that the perspective according to which women were considered fundamentally different from men is implicated in an unequal demand for nationalist work. While Finland's leading male artists of the late 19th century are celebrated by and large for their contributions to developing and disseminating a cohesive, attractive image of the nation, Finnish women artists were taking radical steps in the direction of modernism. With nationalist critics who did not believe that such work was within the capacity or behavioral parameters for women, perhaps these artists sensed and seized a greater sense of freedom and opportunity to pursue works that responded more to international ideals of artistry than to a percolating sense of nationhood. I ask, could the absence of nationalist demands on these women's working lives have resulted in this sense of freedom that produced early modernism in Finnish painting? In any case, I would end by arguing that the relationship between Finnish women artists and nationalism is both present and complex. Thank you.